All right, let's go ahead and take seats so we can begin our afternoon. Personally, I think we're saving the two best panels for last, starting with this one, then followed by mine. But I'm not biased. One thing I want to talk to folks about briefly is the opportunity to publish, particularly your work that maybe you've done here for this event. In one of my other jobs, I'm the editor of the American Intelligence Journal, and we publish twice a year. It's all, of course, unclassified, but we reach a range of intel professionals, both within DoD, military intelligence community, as well as a larger intel community. Our articles are written by students, by practitioners, and in many cases, retirees. We publish both 10 to 20 page articles as well as book reviews. So if you've seen something published recently and you think it's a great book, you could always send me a piece. But I think at least for all the students, you probably have my email, or you through your reps, you can certainly get it. But what I would encourage, particularly the students, to do, if you put together a good piece from this and you want to turn that into an article, I am more than happy to help you publish it. And we've done this in the last couple of years. We've had a number of students that have been able to do this. And like I said, it's a great opportunity. So that's all on mine. Sir?
Thanks. Thanks, Chris. Yeah, take every opportunity you have, right? You've put the work into your research, milk it, right? Poster sessions, presentations, publish, get your money's worth out of it, because you can use that on your what? Resumes, right? So, and the employers are beginning to get set up next door. So, announcement about posters. Posters out in the hall are fine. They can stay where they are. If now at the 2:30 break, we're not going to be able to go and do another poster session per se, because they're going to be doing their setup next door. If you need to leave and take your poster with you, you can go and grab it. That's not a problem. In fact, I encourage you, don't leave your posters behind, except for IWP. I'm gathering those. Okay, so don't forget your posters when you leave. You paid for them, or somebody paid for them. So, but out here in the hallway at the 2:30 break, we can still do poster sessions until we start the career fair. So, all right, thank you. Oh, yeah.
Thanks so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew MacPherson. I'm a professor at the University of New Hampshire, and it's my great pleasure to be here this afternoon and introduce the Emerging Technology panel. So before I begin, it's important as an academic practitioner that I thank everyone who made this possible. Thanks, Aaron and Sarah and the team from IWP. This is outstanding. Thank you to the owner of the company this morning. That was very generous to use the facility. I also wanted to thank the National Intelligence University specifically. We work with them, and Chris Bailey, who operates this consortia as our head. We really appreciate your time, and Manoli Praniotakis, who will be closing out the event today. Just a really great person. Then I wanted to point out Frederick Barron as well. He's doing some really interesting work on the definition of intelligence and how that's different for different countries. So anyways, one more thing is that my co-chair, Phil Baxter, thank you so much. I would be remiss without thanking him. You think about what are these emerging technologies? And it's interesting because AI has sort of captured everyone's attention right now. Some of our students briefed the NCTC last semester on an unclassified briefing on how terrorist groups might use AI. And I thought one of the most interesting points was that they anticipated that there may be terrorist groups that are anti-technology. So they, looked at when tractors were introduced, there were groups who didn't want farmers, who did not want tractors to be introduced. And so I thought it was very interesting this morning about the Ted Kaczynski was anti-technology. I think there is some potential there for those groups. And if you watch Sam Altman, so he's the guy who runs ChatGPT and his company. He was on Lex Friedman a couple of days ago, and one of the concerns he has is that he's going to get shot by an anti-technology group to try and stop AI. So it's not just, our prediction as analysts. I mean, this is a leader in the field, right? Who's concerned about that. So very, very interesting. He also argues that compute. So what do I mean by compute? That's processing cycles, and having access to machines that can process quickly is going to be the currency of the future. It's going to be one of our most important resources. So I think in addition to the minerals and other batteries, things we were talking about, you have to think about compute as well. That's something that could be an energy, because there's a lot of energy to do the compute that then gets you to the models that drive AI technology. And some folks are going to talk about that, how AI can drive in our panel today. The last thing I wanted to say is that it's really interesting how commercial technologies can play an impact in the military side or in the security space. So if we think about what happened in Ukraine, where they lost their satellite, right? The Russians took down. And then they started to use, what was it, Marysat or whatever they had. They took down their satellite and started to use the Starlink, right? Which are all these small satellites, which are not as prone to being easily taken out. That infrastructure. And then they link that to this government app that they had already that everyone was able to use, and basically made that sort of an Uber for artillery, right? So if you're out there in Ukraine and you see something that needs to be hit by artillery, you basically have this Uber type app and you can dial it up. And that's something that we don't have, right? We have this JADC2 that our government is building out, but that type of capability, I would argue that, it was developed by exigency, right? They needed that technology and they were able to develop it and employ it, where we don't have that here. So the window that our panel presenters are going to provide today is a window into the future. I think you'll find it very interesting. I'd like to have the same protocol as the other panels, where we will the presenters right now. I'll run through that, and then we'll go in order for the presentations. If you could hold your questions till the end, and that will give everyone an opportunity to get through the materials, and then we'll go. So we have Sydney Effer from James Madison University. Hi, Sydney. We've got Jahnavi Muthalay from James Madison as well, right? And Gaston, and Lindsay Toothaker, right? Thanks, also from JMU. Gaston, you're here. Gaston Elongha from, which school are you from, Gaston? Marymount, thank you very much. And then we have Alex Krulewitch from IWP. That's our IWP rep. Thanks, Alex. And then Sam Rooker from JMU with the models of if you haven't seen them yet. Did you guys bring them in? There they are right there. We've got the models of the UAVs you can see, which ties right into the things we're talking about. Okay, so enough from me. I'm going to turn it over to Sydney.
Can everyone hear me? Alrighty. Hi everyone, my name is Sydney Effer. I'm here coming from JMU, and today I'll be talking about a new emerging piece of technology called metagenomic next-generation sequencing and its application to aid intelligence in the biodefense realm. Now, the emergence of new technologies is transforming the United States intelligence community, particularly in the biodefense realm. And with the US not being the only ones making these advancements, China, for example, stressed heavily in the United States intelligence community threat assessment just released earlier this year. It's crucial for us to consider these pieces of technology to develop, field, and integrate them into the intelligence process to address these national security threats, such as infectious diseases. Now, in response to these advancements done by our adversaries, particularly China, both the DoD and NATO have launched initiatives. The DoD launching the Distributed Bioindustrial Manufacturing Investment Program, and NATO launching DIANA, the Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. Both of these seeking to strengthen domestic supply chain, as well as sustaining our global prominence in the biodefense industry. Now, what this research that I've done does is bridge that gap on what this piece of technology is, metagenomic next-generation sequencing, or mNGS for short, because it's a mouthful. It bridges that gap on what this piece of technology is and if it can be applied to aid intelligence in the biodefense realm, and if so, how. So what is this piece of technology? What is metagenomic next generation sequencing? So this sequencing technology can generate all nucleic acids, so your DNA, your RNA, amplify them, and then use bioinformatics tools and software to interpret the results. And it can tell you what is going on within your patient, whether that's a disease, a virus, an infection, whatever it may be. It can provide a comprehensive pathogen detection with its sensitive sequencing done. So it can give you a real in-depth look into what's going on within your patient to help specifically with treatment strategies, how to navigate their infection or the disease, whatever it may be. It also can provide high throughput and unbiased analysis. So it provides that unbiased detection or by detecting your patient without any prior knowledge of the patient or targeting any specific infections or diseases or any type of pathogens, which is crucial, especially in intelligence, because we know having that unbiased information is key for the analyst. The turnaround time, that's another big part about defining what this technology is, and a big question that's always asked. So this is a wide range, 5 to a 30-hour turnaround time, and this is all dependent on what sequencing platform you use. The two primary ones are Nanopore and Illumina. You can guess the cost to benefit of using one over the other. Nanopore, you get a way quicker turnaround time, somewhere from around 5 to 10 hours, but you don't get such in-depth sensitive sequencing done. So you can't get a real great in-depth look into what's going on within your patient. But with Illumina, it takes a lot longer, somewhere around 30 hours, maybe even more, to get those results. But once you do, you get a real in-depth look on what's going on within your patient, which is really beneficial, especially with dealing with national security threats like infectious diseases. Now, the steps of mNGS, you can see them laid out in the bottom of the slide. Now, this starts with sample collection. So collecting any biological material from your patient. This could be a blood sample, urine, any type of fluid from your patient, skin, tissue, anything like that. And then in the second step, you're going to extract the DNA or RNA from that. So you have strands of DNA or RNA. And then in library preparation, you will fragment those into tiny little pieces called sequencing reads or short reads. And then in mNGS, in the sequencing process, it can generate millions of these tiny little short reads. And that's millions more than traditional sequencing technologies, which can generate at most up to about 200. So that's what makes mNGS so advanced and intriguing for the biotech industry. Next, data analysis happens with bioinformatics tools and software, which can actually give you a look into what's going on within your patient, and then a professional can come in and tell you what's actually going on and interpret these results. Now, through my research, I found key judgments, and these being that mNGS has the potential to revolutionize pathogen detection and identification for intelligence in the biodefense realm. And while capable of enhancing detection and response to biological threats, the implementation of this technology will require time and trial. Now, like we talked about earlier, implementing something into government use to aid intelligence requires a lot of time, and it's a slow process. So it's going to take a lot, and especially when mNGS, this technology doesn't have a strict procedure about going through each step. So that's going to have to we're going to have to hone down on that, and then it'll take some time to implement it as well. So integrating mNGS to aid intelligence in the biodefense realm will ultimately hone that collection and processing phase of intelligence, which will make it really effective and efficient in addressing these national security threats like infectious diseases. Now, through my research, I did an in-depth literature review focusing on 3 pillars, the first being the benefits and the drawbacks of its use. So mNGS has the ability to detect multiple pathogens in just one singular test, especially with its highly sensitive sequencing that's done, so it can give you a really comprehensive understanding about what's going on within your patient. Now, this is really key and crucial into dealing with national security threats that have such high implications. But with high implications, you've got to look at the drawbacks as well. So with the drawbacks of this technology, it is pricey. It has a high cost to actually acquire it, implement it, and then also maintain that technology. The turnaround time. Again, with dealing with such threats, you're going to want that in-depth result into what's going on within each patient, within each person that's being tested. So it's going to take a longer time, and we all know that you want that timely analysis done for your decision or your policymaker. So that can also be a hindrance as well. Again, that standardized process. There's not a strict procedure about going through each step, especially that sample preparation step. So that is ultimately also going to be a drawback of this. And then understanding the results. This is a new and emerging piece of technology, like we talked about. So teaching professionals how to understand that diagnostic utility is going to be crucial into mitigating this drawback. Next, I looked at the current uses of this technology in place. So this technology has primarily been used in the medical field, helping with pathogen detection, so better diagnoses, and also more personalized treatment strategies for each patient, given how sensitive the results are and that comprehensive results. However, mNGS has been used for outbreak surveillance. Just in 2014, mNGS was used by the Abbott lab to surveil the outbreak of the Ebola virus within the Congo. And then the current technologies in place to aid intelligence and biodefense. At Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, a DoD-funded national laboratory, they have biofeeds in place, and you can see that a snapshot of that in the bottom right. This is different information analysis, or information, reports, news, intelligence coming in about emerging biothreats, and this helps analysts in assessing the problem and then relying that on to their decision maker or policymaker. And then in the private sector, there's labs and companies like Blue Dot exist where they look at open source intelligence to forecast emerging biothreats. And then through my discussion and conclusion, I looked for ways that this could actually be implemented to aid intelligence in the biodefense realm. The first way this could be implemented is to detect and characterize bioterrorism agents. Now, this could be used at research labs or defense labs and research facilities. This could also be integrated into surveillance systems, so at U.S. ports of entry, border security, or potentially at critical infrastructure facilities to detect these potential threats. And then another way this could be implemented is tracking outbreaks and emerging pathogens. The military could utilize this technology to track the outbreaks and surveil where they may be going, especially among deployed personnel. The CDC could also use this to track outbreak dynamics as well. Now, the implications of this research is that it is crucial for advancing our ability to detect and respond to biological threats. And this emerging piece of technology can help us with that in the intelligence process. However, this will take a lot of time, future research into the technology, and further developments within metagenomic next generation sequencing for an application to aid intelligence to support decision making. Thank you.
Would you give the controller over to them? Yeah, thank you. All right.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Lindsay Toothaker, and my partner Jahnavi Muthalay and I are sophomores at James Madison University. And today we will be presenting the research that we've been doing on China's development in CRISPR-Cas9 biotechnology and its significance to future U.S. national security. So CRISPR-Cas9 is a gene editing technology that functions by cutting DNA at specific locations on the genome in order to either add, delete, or replace a targeted gene. It's been researched since the late 1990s and is considered to be a future pioneer of the field. Our current standing judgment from the research that we conducted is that China has the capability to outcompete the US in biotechnology applications such as CRISPR. This is the most recent 2024 annual threat assessment, which was published by the ODNI last month, and it claims that China has become a rival in DNA sequencing equipment and research, and this puts it in a position to lead in both the medical and agriculture fields, specifically related to CRISPR. This is also supported by some past information that we found. This includes charts published in 2017 by John Cohen, which showed that the United States and China were about equal in their patent applications that involved CRISPR-Cas9, but that China was starting to get ahead in their medical and agriculture research publications and papers. This also aligns with the experiments that were researched that we'll later talk about in our China capabilities section. Well, it's really important to understand the state of the testing programs in both countries and the rivalry that's ensued. We decided to focus primarily on how China could use their CRISPR-Cas9 capabilities with their military to enhance them with biologically enhanced super soldiers. To have a better understanding of China's capabilities, we decided to look at some specific cases of interest with their testing. So one of those was animals. In many fields, animal testing precedes human testing, and this was also the case with CRISPR-Cas9. So looking first into the medical field, HIV transmission and the elimination of it has been a hot topic lately. And this started with the testing of humanized mice, which are mice that are engrafted with the DNA, tissue, or cells of humans in order to kind of mimic that behavior when gene edited. And when this was successful targeting the CCR5 gene for that HIV transmission, it later moved into human testing. In 2018, Dr. He Jiankui did an experiment that involved editing the embryos of twin girls in order to target this same gene, with the hopes of being able to eliminate HIV transmission for humans too. This was a highly criticized experiment on an ethical standpoint, just because editing human embryos wasn't something that had been done, and it's something that has a lot of public opinions about it. So that was our main controversy and really our only example of human testing that we were able to find open source. Not only did we find examples of testing, but we also looked into related research and publications coming from both the military and universities. So Elsa Kania published a really helpful article on this that talked about the People's Liberation Army hospitals and the military research that's going on, but also detailed a doctoral dissertation published by a student at the Academy of Military Medical Sciences, which was titled Research on the Evaluation of Human Performance Technology, and it focused specifically with CRISPR-Cas9 and cognitive enhancement.
So currently, the use of cyber espionage has been assisting China with the creation of high-tech weapons. But our research indicated that the ability to easily replicate these weapons has significantly gone down due to the intricacy required to work with this type of technology, as well as the limited resources and expertise that a state has. And so, therefore, it's reasonable to assume that if states, especially China, cannot measure up to the US military-wise, there is a possibility that they might turn to using biotech as another alternative. So, like Lindsay mentioned, there's been very little research on the idea of super soldiers itself because there's been no long-term successful experiments. However, countries have really started to prioritize their biotech programs as seen by the successful animal and agricultural trials. China specifically combines academic and military testing to easily create devices that will be more effective and to do it quicker than if only the military were to carry out testing. And so China prohibits the enhancement of embryos for reproduction, but allows the modification without implementation for research purposes up to 2 weeks post-conception, whereas the US completely bans direct editing of the germline sequence. The Chinese government encouraging the use of CRISPR through academic means, particularly with eliminating diseases, speaks more to the fact that it is an unregulated process than the United States currently has. Even though China has organizations that regulate these trials, they still provide federal funding towards academic institutions, which is also banned in the United States for germline editing purposes. It is also important to note that prior US laws indicate that the United States believes that any testing on embryos can breach our code of ethics, whereas China allows it up to 2 weeks post-conception. And we can assess that this distinction in rigidity of laws is primarily because of religious and cultural views. The United States is aware of China as an increasing biotechnology threat, as evidenced by the 2024 annual threat assessment stating that China now rivals the US in DNA sequence equipment and some foundational research, as well as the fact that Beijing's large volume of genetic data potentially positions it to lead in precision medicine and agricultural biotechnology applications. This research aims to bring awareness to China's ability to use CRISPR to eventually create super soldiers, which poses a risk to the international community due to their recent confrontational behavior, as well as the fact that China allows for usage of federal funding to go towards academic testing, just testing, and the government generally supports genetic engineering programs thus allowing it to progress much farther and faster than the United States. Overall, the threat of bionic soldiers is dangerous because it effectively tips the balance of power in China's favor and leads to domination of regional powers, therefore affecting U.S. regional allies and economic interests.
As proven by testing capabilities, the military and university research that we looked into, and the differences in regulation and public opinion, China definitely has the capability to gain an advantage in the gene editing race with the US, presenting an array of national security threats. If China were to pursue this development of genetically enhanced super soldiers, this would be a threat both to the United States military, but also to nations in Southeast Asia that we have economic or other interests with, and who might not have as powerful of military forces. We did find that there were a lot of limitations in our research with us just cracking the surface, and this included a lack of credible sources that directly came from Chinese researchers. Mostly, we think because we weren't able to access a lot of open source things. Regarding the super soldier argument specifically, a lot of the sources that we found were mainly news oriented and were based in controversy that opened in 2020 when a lot of media, such as the New York Post and The Guardian, were publishing articles about these super soldiers as a massive and soon incoming threat when this might not necessarily be true. The US intelligence community appears to be more aware of this concept as a threat based on the documents that have been published, but we are unsure of how much action is actually being taken to combat the progress being made by China. And we think that the US intelligence community should continue to monitor these developments in order to avoid unanticipated conflict in future biotechnology development. Thank you.
Hey everybody, my name is Gaston Elongha. I'm a doctoral student in cybersecurity at Marymount University. I'm glad to be here. I hope we're gonna enjoy this presentation. So as we gather here today, we find ourselves at a critical moment where the transportation technologies is evolving, where we have AI, where we have artificial intelligence meeting the transportation in sector. So as we have those advancements in the autonomous vehicles combined with AI, now we have the capability of having a car capable of taking action without the human interference. So we did some research and we found out that lawmakers are already making alarming concern about the use of foreign AI embedded vehicles being tested here in America, especially in California, where they found out that those foreign AI embedded vehicles were collecting data on American citizens as well as critical infrastructures. So as we can see, the foreign AI embedded vehicles can pose a threat to the national security because they depend on foreign entities. So moving on to the next slide, I need you guys to understand what is AI autonomous vehicles. So if anybody here got lucky to have a car that can do a parallel parking by itself, that's a form of AI autonomous vehicle. So that's a form of a slight form of a car that is using AI embedded. So as you can see, the picture on the left and on the left side, we can see that was one of the foreign AI autonomous vehicles that was tested in California, and those are the vehicles that pose problem when they collected data, and the data collection and the privacy pose sovereignty and national security threat because we didn't know where those data were being stored. So moving on to the layered architecture for AI, as you can see it, I put a warning sign so you can see that an autonomous vehicles rely on 3 layers. We have a perception layer, we have a network layer, and an application layer. So in order for an autonomous vehicle to navigate through the traffic and make the decision by itself, it has to rely on those 3 layers to make those traffic decisions. And by relying on those 3 layers, there are some input in each layers. We can see there are sensors, there are cameras, there are satellites, in the network layer, we can see we have the communication where you have to connect your phone so your car can connect to the internet through your phone. And we also the application layer where all the driving data have to be stored to a data center. And in the case of foreign AI autonomous vehicles, the data center it's located in the foreign entities. And because the foreign entity, different countries have their own laws. For example, China, I don't want to just keep using China, but for example, China, they have their own way of laws of what is privacy and what is not. So we can just see how an autonomous vehicle relying on those three layers can impact the national security throughout, for example, the persuasion layer. For an entity can use the autonomous vehicles to take photos of critical infrastructures, can use sensors to record even the person who's driving the car, like communication and all those things. And at the network layer, we can, because the data center is stored in a foreign entity, so they can also put some input in there. They can also put some input on the application layer that can also change the way of the autonomous vehicles being driving. So what are the threat that foreign autonomous vehicle pose to the national security? The first, an alarming thing is cybersecurity vulnerabilities combined with the vulnerabilities of emerging technology. So somebody may ask me, why you have cybersecurity vulnerabilities first? Well, because the car itself is relying on three layers, as I showed you earlier, and those layers relies also on different other aspects such as cameras, and those cameras, they're also a part of technology. They have to connect to internet where they're sharing the data, and those are the cybersecurity vulnerabilities that can be exploited because those are the technology apart from the whole car, the whole autonomous vehicles. Another national security threat is surveillance and espionage. So foreign autonomous vehicles can be a moving intelligence collection. And I have to mention here that in cybersecurity threat intelligence collection or intelligence itself, it's the key. If you have the key to the information, then you can act in any time or the moment you want to. Another national security threat that posed by foreign AI autonomous vehicles is logical and transport tragedies, which means, as I said, because the application layer it's probably managed by foreign entities, they can use the application layer to give some input in the machine learning, which is the intelligence behind the driving decision. They can put some input through the application layer that can change the way the car is driving, and that can cause accident, that can change the traffic and all that. So the last one can also a further weaponize of the AI autonomous vehicles, which means because they control the car during a time of conflict, they can weaponize the car to do anything that can hurt the national security. So those are not just me making it up. It was also proven in the annual threat assessment of the intelligence community, the ATA 2024, that China, for example, is also expanding its global intelligence posture. China is, for example, from a cybersecurity perspective, they are the most active persistent threat. And then China also has increased its cyber espionage, which is one of the threats that posed by foreign AI, as well as surveillance and information, which I said information collection is a key in cybersecurity threat intelligence. So is it happening already? Yes, it's happening because it's already been tested in California. They're testing already for AI embedded vehicles, where they're testing it. It's on a testing process. But as TikTok, we didn't know that TikTok was also collecting information. So this is just a way of showing how emerging technology are introducing both benefits and also negative impact on the national security. So it's just a way for us also to know that those foreign AI autonomous vehicles, their adoption have to be restricted or at least come up with a solution. So as of part of the solution, my research, I came up with a cross-disciplinary approach framework where we have to have a unified effort where we put a strategic approach, which is a good way that was published in the Biden administration, the National Security Strategy. I recommend you guys to go read it. There's so much priorities over there where we recognize who is the competitors and how we should act. And I also recommend a resilient approach, which is the National Cybersecurity Strategy. And part of that national security strategy, we have, for example, secure by design, where we can enforce that to foreign autonomous vehicles, to force them, as I said, intelligence collection is a key, and all those cybersecurity vulnerabilities can be solved by enforcing the national security strategy. And finally, we do have a federal autonomous vehicle policy, but it's only asking manufacturer to just comply. But from my research, I found out that compliance is not security. So to enforce that, we need to enforce that policy to all the foreign autonomous vehicles here in America. They're coming. I'm not saying we have it there, but the adoption helped to follow this cross-disciplinary approach where we have to have a joint effort to help solve this problem. So as a takeaway, I want you guys to take home today. I just want you to remember that the foreign AI autonomous vehicle are introducing cybersecurity vulnerabilities combined with emerging technology. They're also introducing a surveillance and espionage, as my panel also said. And they're also introducing logistical and transportation strategy, as well as a feeding weaponized attack during the time of conflict. Of course, there are also some moral issue. For example, how the data being collected, what are the regulations in place that can also be enforced, and the mitigation strategy is just the cross-disciplinary approach where we have to work together to enforce laws and cybersecurity effort to assess the threat that they introduced to the national security. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alex Krulewitch. Thank you, Dr. MacPherson, for moderating this for us. Obviously, this is an emerging technology panel, and I'm talking about psychology, which is not an emerging technology. So psychology obviously has been around for a long time, and it is vast. I'm specifically looking at some of the applications of psychology in the field of intelligence. And at the end, I'll finish up with some conclusions. But my main takeaway is that we want to get the psychology piece into the academic curriculum of security studies, intelligence, national security programs. So like I said, this is an old tool, and it is emerging in its application, not in the tool itself. So I'm going to talk through some of the different models that could be useful in some different recruitment or intelligence purposes. When I say recruitment, there's two pieces. There's recruitment of assets and sources from people within the IC of external parties, and there's the recruitment of employees into the IC. So I'll talk about the critical pathway model, which is more of an insider threat assessment. I'll talk about some of the influences on behavior, a key questionnaire that I think is particularly useful, and some motivations for espionage, and really assets. And then I'll finish up with some conclusions. So the critical pathway model was coined by Dr. Gerald Post, who was a CIA psychologist. It's primarily used in the context of insider threats, so whether that be private sector businesses, government, etc., but it encompasses all the different factors that can contribute into that counterproductive work behavior. That could be as mild as a conflict or in interpersonal relationships, or that could be as severe as espionage, whether that's in the IC or in the private sector, et cetera. So I'll talk more about some of these different factors, but the personality piece, that's the profiling piece that we're going to talk about, contributes to those emotions, those stressors, and how we engage with them. So everyone has these different predispositions that are a combination of our genetic and environmental upbringing, and they all contribute to the way we react in certain situations. So there's external stressors, there's internal factors, and all of these come together to some grievance, perceived lack of control, and that's last step is what takes us from a potential or so a threat or risk to the actual counterproductive work behavior. So some of the influences on behavior can be boiled down to these 6 categories. Culture and clan refers to our cultural context, our society, whether we're a more docile or dominant culture, and really being able to evaluate the context of whoever or whatever you're looking at. There are some differences with that. In terms of biography and family, there's a variety of different factors that shape who we are. So there's your childhood, your genetic environmental factors, like I mentioned, some of those interpersonal relationships that can happen both early on and later in our life. Intelligence, that refers to not just IQ, but also EQ, emotional quotient. This also refers to our successes and failures that we've had in our academic, professional careers. These can all factor our personality and behavior. Personality, I've sort of boiled it down to the 5-factor model here and the extremes of those. That's just one of many models available for personality, but I think that's pretty all-encompassing. And the main factor there is any one trait or behavior is not a problem in itself. Some of these extremes show patterns, and with those patterns, some of those external triggers or stressors can further perpetuate these. Dark side refers to the dark triad, which is Machiavellianism, narcissism, and psychopathy. Again, these are some traits that have been shown, but it's not fair to say that that is always the case. And when we look at espionage or any of these profiling patterns, it's things to look out for that can be tracked or monitored through questionnaires or tests that, when combined with other factors, can make the predisposition higher. And then finally, that motivation piece, I'll talk a bit more later on. It's a combination of evolutionary needs, so survival, a desire to be a part of society, to be liked, to protect ourselves, take care of our loved ones, those kinds of things. So MCMI, the 4th edition, is the Millen Clinical Multi-Axel Inventory. That's a lot of words to describe a questionnaire that is a self-reported assessment. It's one of the shortest of its kind. It takes about 30 minutes, and it is self-reported, meaning that whoever the target or individual is taking the test, it records not only the answers, but some of the validity or reliability of those answers by the different scales it provides. Ideally, it doesn't necessarily show a problem or not a problem. It is a scale. So these are a bunch of scales. So you have both adaptive and maladaptive features. And that doesn't necessarily equal a potential problematic person, but it increases that likelihood of the dysfunction. And there's definitely ways to counteract or balance some of these traits so it can be fixed without having to escalate to that point. Some of the scales that are particularly useful are not specific to this questionnaire, but in general, we talk about alcohol abuse, drug abuse, sadism, masochism, antisocial personality. None of these things individually equal someone who is a problem, because I don't think it's fair to say that any one of these things can determine, but they contribute to that assessment of having that complete picture that helps us understand what makes us both our behaviors and who we are in terms of our personality. So Randy Burkett, who was a career case officer at the CIA and then transitioned to the research and academic side, expanded on the traditional motivations for spying, for espionage, for being a source. The conventional understanding was money, ideology, coercion, or ego. He expanded these further into what's called rascals. Reciprocation or reciprocity is based on the notion that we're more likely to do something for someone if we feel that they have provided us something. So if we have been given something or have been aided in other actions, we're more likely to respond and do something for that individual. Authority refers to that power balance between peoples. It can be both implicit and explicit. An implicit power dynamic tends to be less volatile because there isn't necessarily that resentment of an explicit dynamic. Scarcity is the notion that we want what we can't have. This is the true not just in the motivations for espionage. I think this is something we all experience. If you get an offer and then that offer is revoked, we always have that fear of missing out or that fear of what we can't have. This is also referred to as the Romeo and Juliet effect. And then there's also consistency or commitment. These are two different terms to encompass a continuous assurance that what people are doing is the right choice. This can be through rewards, through just assurance of companionship or a relationship, but it's just maintaining that assurance that you're in it together. This also relates to the liking, which is how we behave, not just in this case, but in life. We are more likely to engage with people we like. That can be hobbies, that could be interests, culture, society, all of those things contribute into how we feel about people and whether or not we want to engage. Same with social proof. If we see someone else do it and whether they're not punished or they are rewarded, we are more likely to conduct in that same behavior. So finally, all of these tools are not in themselves a magical fix to any question, but they can help these gut feelings or this intuition that we have, whether it's about something being wrong or something being right. And it takes that intuition or gut feeling and converts it to a more analytical or methodological judgment. The clinical judgment is what it's called in the psychology world. You can call it however you want to phrase it. The notion is these are tools to aid these feelings rather than replacing them altogether. So my big push here is psychology obviously play in both the present, the future, the past, and it's not well represented in security studies, intelligence, national security curriculum. So of the about 100 Intel programs I surveyed, Spracker was the one who found them, and I looked through them. Only 6 had explicit psychology courses offered, and with that, some were profiling, terrorism, analysis of cross-cultural references. All of this is to say that there is a lack of representation in these standards and requirements in the IC, in these academic programs, and working to prepare these students before they enter into the IC will make them more efficient once they are entering into that workforce. Thank you very much, and I'll pass this along. Thank you all.
Alrighty, can everybody hear me all right? Okay, I see some drooping eyelids out there, so I'm going to try to keep this quick and succinct. My name is Sam Rooker. I'm from James Madison University, and I'm going to try to give you the bottom line of a paper we've been developing for almost 4 months, titled Unmanned and Unleashed, the Evolution of Naval Warfare Through Ukrainian Guerrilla Drone Tactics. Okay, there we are. So the bottom line is this, and it may not be pretty, but Ukrainian uses of unmanned surface vessels or unmanned sea vehicles just hasn't matched the use of unmanned aerial vehicles yet in the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. That's a truth that is hard to accept right now, but it's not something that has to stay that way. It is improvable, and it is a status that can be developed, but there are core reasons why it hasn't matched that use yet. And today, I want to give you the bottom line as to how Ukraine can step forward in using these unmanned sea vehicles. And it's interesting that this is an emerging technology panel because this technology has emerged. It is not emerging, it has come to force. And now we have to decide how we're going to improve it in order to win this war. There are 3 core aspects where I think it becomes important to understand how this technology is developing. Understanding that this is ultimately a war of machines, comparing Russian predominantly used UAVs versus Ukrainian USVs. Understanding Russian and Ukrainian drone warfare and how that plays into ideological differences in how this technology is used. And finally, understanding how this can be used to expand this technology. Because this war is winnable, and I do hope for a peaceful resolution. But right now, it's time for the hard facts, and it's time to come to terms with what this technology really means. So, as author Eric Schmidt writes for Foreign Affairs on October 23rd, 2024, and I do quote, "In the early parts of the war, Ukraine held the upper hand, outfitting commercial technology with offensive weapons." So early on in the war, we saw photos coming out of either ground-based vehicles or aerial-based commercial bot drones that were literally duct-taped to hand grenades or handguns. And in many ways, early on in the war, that resourcefulness was useful. But as it's continued, and Russia has continued to expand its line of unmanned aerial vehicles, that resourcefulness has gone into different directions. All of the imagery produced here is from our team at James Madison University, and here we have 2 3D models that we developed. On the top, you have the Shahed 137, an Iranian firm-produced drone that Russia is currently using. And I think it's interesting to compare that with the drone on the bottom image, which is the Marichka drone, a Russian-designed unmanned sea vessel, and the design languages could not be more distinct between these two. The Shahed has clear angles of incidence and is a beautifully designed piece of engineering designed for years in engineering firms, whereas the Marichka simply doesn't have that cleanliness. We've been running fluid dynamics simulations using these 3D models we developed at JMU, and they are simply not comparable in terms of the amount of water or air that they displace. And really, this comes down to the fact that Ukraine hasn't had the development time to produce these drones en masse over many years. Russia has clearly had the upper hand. As a DIA report shares on August 25th, 2023, Russian design firms, through their vertically integrated economy, have designed these engineering programs for decades, and they've had that development time to produce models which are clearly superior, but they're not putting that money into unmanned sea vessels, they're putting it into unmanned aerial vehicles. But Ukraine has seen an opportunity, and they are taking advantage of it rightfully as they should. And the opportunity is to go into the oceans, where Russia is not really taking advantage of the war front as it exists. But there is an opportunity there, and there is an opportunity for improvement. But the main problem right now is that the money isn't going into investing in that front end development, the core technology behind unmanned sea vessels. It's going into what we have talked about at James Madison University as the shotgun approach, where Ukraine is putting out multiple different lines of unmanned sea vessels and trying to see what works. But that approach doesn't define the core issues behind the sea vessels. It just keeps putting out new designs until they find something that works in one specific situation. But what Ukraine needs now is unmanned sea vessels that work across many different situations. That also comes into understanding the Ukrainian USV strategy, which right now, as we talked about, is that shotgun approach, trying to do many things at once and being successful at some of them and being completely unsuccessful at other parts of them. One of the core things that we've discussed is that there is a significant price difference right now between the investment money that's going in for USVs and UAVs. Our team estimates through our survey of the current pricing that it's almost 10 to 20% more expensive to produce a Ukrainian-produced unmanned sea vessel than it is a Russian-produced unmanned aerial vehicle. And that price difference is significant when you're fighting a war with such tight budgets. The other thing is that while USVs have been significantly effective in things like reducing mine clearance and certain research production, it hasn't really been defined in terms of its role for offensive weaponry. And while that is something that can be looked at long term, right now in the short term, that offensive weaponry is more important than ever. When, as a Wired article of February 12th, 2024 offers, 2 years out from the start of the war, we're in deadlock right now, and Ukraine needs every upper hand it can possibly gain. The other part of this comes down to the effectiveness unmanned aerial vehicles and unmanned sea vehicles have. This geospatial imagery was produced by a member of our team at James Madison University, Joel Kirian. And on the right, you have an attack on a Russian-manned sea complex that took only one wave of unmanned vehicle attacks to fully destroy it. Whereas on the left, you have a ship that was in port that took 3 waves of Ukrainian unmanned sea vessels to fully destroy. So clearly, there is a gap between those development times, and ultimately it asks us to shift how we define success at sea, because how we use these drones is going to be significantly different from how we traditionally defined our success in naval warfare. But all of these factors add up to a whole that isn't simply aiding the Ukrainian military right now. These unmanned sea vessels are worth investing in. We have to look at more specific, concrete areas where we can start investing in their development. So it all comes down to what we're calling our team Ukrainian guerrilla drone warfare, which is basically using the tools and the abilities of the current Ukrainian military as it stands today to produce the most effective weapons possible. Sometimes that means investing in technologies that aren't just offensive weapons, but other areas that Ukraine hasn't really invested its time or its money in yet. One of those is mapping technologies. There's not a lot being done right now to map where debris is left after attacks in the current war, and I think that's something that's going to be crucially important as Ukraine hopes to man those seas and explore them, is to use these drones to explore that mapping technology. Or as a report from the United Youth Services Institute on March 12th, 2024 offers, no Ukrainian sea drone yet has fully utilized LiDAR mapping technology. That mapping technology could be crucial, helping them understand how the battlefront stands and how they can make full advantage of it in the future. The other thing that presents a significant opportunity here is signals intelligence. There is a complete lack of signals collection or offensive signals understanding through these sea drones. But it is worth exploring and fully understanding, because if these drones can be collecting signals and analyzing them at Ukrainian headquarters, then there is an opportunity there to make offensive moves that just isn't being taken advantage of right now. And then a third thing that, and we ended up talking a lot about today, but never really defining, was AI integration. Let me break that down for you really quickly as best I can. These drones are not completely unmanned. In the majority of their situations, because they haven't had that front-end development time, they require somebody to pilot them or control them. If they can get into autonomous integration, so these drones can make the majority of their journeys unmanned, then that can significantly reduce the amount of manpower that's required, and it gives them a significant edge on UAVs, which really don't have that technology either right now. But ultimately, this project isn't a one-man person. There was a lot of work that went into this. I'd like to first thank my other research partner who's in the audience right now, Ryan Stevens, who did a lot of our strategic analysis. Also, Joel Kirian, who produced some of the wonderful mapping imagery you saw throughout this presentation. Our academic advisor at JMU, Dr. Gianno Giuseppe Pili, a wonderful man, a wonderful research advisor. And finally, I would encourage you all to go out and find this paper when it's finally published by the NATO Defense College. And our editor, Dr. Florence Gaub, and also our publisher. And I'd be remiss if I didn't end with this. But as coverage has discussed the war in Ukraine, there's a group that is significantly underrepresented, and it is engineers. It is engineers, it is signal analysts, and it is the people who are producing it on the front end. And I have to say, let's not make their loss in vain. Because if we can continue to develop this technology that is worth investing in, then it is a better rest that they go to, and it is worth doing right now. Let's hope for a peaceful resolution in Ukraine.
Thank you, Sam. If I could get one of the IWP folks to bring up a mic in case anyone wants to ask some questions. I'll take the moderator's prerogative of asking the first one. So, Sam, I really enjoyed your paper and the work of you and your colleagues. But it seems to me that your measures you're using, either destructiveness in the photo satellite imagery that you had, or volume, I think that was your argument in the air vehicles versus the sea vehicles. There are other measures, right? So maybe, in fact, some analysts like Michael Kaufman are arguing right now that the sea-borne attacks by the UAVs is more important than the air attacks because of the publicity it gets. Remember was it the Mitchell raid on Tokyo, where it didn't make any significant impact, but psychologically for the country, it was a big impact. So where do you think that stands? Why did you choose your measures versus these other measures?
It's a really good question. Not really that I chose them for the entire project. There are some measures in our paper that we don't get into here because this is a 10-minute presentation of a 28-page paper, but more specifically that there are measures we can use to try to understand their effectiveness that don't exactly involve destructiveness. This war will end one day, and I hope that after its resolution, we can use these for peaceful means. If we can use them to measure the ocean floor or map it, which mostly remains unmapped, then that is an opportunity that we're not taking advantage of. But there are ways we can measure it, we get into in the paper, and there are places that it's being effective. So that's why it's worth looking into. It's just sometimes that, especially for an audience like this, I try to give them the most direct approach that I can.
Thank you. Do we have a question from the audience?
I actually have two questions if the time allotted allows for it. Okay, the first one is for Sydney and the second one is for Alex. Hi, I'm Ariana. I am a student at the National Intelligence University in addition to being an active duty intelligence specialist for the US Navy. Treating something like Bacillus anthracis, which causes anthrax, is important to eliminate it, or it's really important to eliminate it before it has the opportunity to create excess toxin in the body. So 15 or 5 to 30 hours sounds like a really decent time frame. How does that compare to our legacy methods of identification? And is this technology like astronomically quicker than our previous methods?
All right, thank you. Yeah, I think this piece of technology, the time frame is really nice. And I think with old technologies or just previously there's next generation sequencing, which is right before it, or just PCR. sequencing like that, I think this technology can really hone down on what is going on within your patient a little bit more. And I think that time frame is beneficial. I'm not sure if that answers your question fully, but compared to more traditional technologies, I think this technology definitely has more benefits, especially detecting something like you talked about with anthrax in the body.
Second one is for you. Sorry, I'm incredibly caffeinated right now. I wrote a paper on the identification of psychopaths by using their social media activities, such as like Twitter posts, because they happen to use specific words more often than, say, a neurotypical person would. So I agree with you that certain personality traits can be indicators for a willingness to engage in aggressive or malicious behaviors. I guess this is more of like an ethical question. Do you believe screening, since it's possible, should be isolated to job interviews, or do you think, since we have the capability, that it should be an algorithm embedded into broad applications like social media? Is it profiling people based on open source information that would tread on their individual rights, or is it important for national security?
So I'm not sure if this is a little bit of a cop-out, but I think in terms of IC capability, I think we collect on foreign nationals. So domestically, to collect domestically in any capacity seems like an infringement of that legal and statutory framework that we have in place right now. That's not to say that it won't change. But I think, obviously, like you said, when we're employing people, and some of these things that I'm proposing we use are not necessarily so that we mark people and say, oh, potential psychopath. It's more looking at traits and saying, okay, this type of individual might function in this type of work environment better, or they might be more or less able to give us valid information. So not to not answer your question, because I think there is definitely an ethical dilemma. And I think as it stands, we couldn't just collect like that, especially on US persons. But that's not to say that in the future, that might be something that we don't really read that terms and condition. And when we sign up for social media, we're giving away that right. That could be the case down the road. So I'm not sure if that fully answers your question. Thank you.
I'm just going to take one more for Alex, and then I'll come to you. So, Alex, you advocate for inclusion in the curriculum of some sort of survey course or something. Is it that what you're advocating for? And how do you articulate, or what's your rationale for including psychology over data science, or over some of the other courses, engineering, that we might want to have, or AI that we might want to have, that are also priorities?
So I would say this is not to replace anything. I think a lot of the current curriculum actually have psychology in them. They just don't call it that. So finding ways to help current professors, teachers, etc., who already have these courses developed, and maybe add a little bit that better defines what psychology can be. Because I don't think we're replacing, or we're trying to get rid of anything, or we're choosing psychology over the many other things that are a pressing concern. I think it is another tool in how we think. So it is a lens in how we find these judgments, assessments, etc. Sorry. And I think that we can supplement what we already have without having to fully scrap or fully add. And even, I mean, I won't go back. This had little, sorry, is that better? How little representation there is in the current curriculum, but that doesn't mean there's not psychology in these other courses. It's just not marketed as such. So I'm pushing for integration.
Hi, my name is Peace. I'm from IWP. I really loved this panel, especially undergrads. I just want to commend you. Amazing work. My question is actually for Gaston. I was just wondering, how many of these foreign autonomous vehicles are being used across the US, and for how long have they been implemented? And if you just talk about like the scope of the issue, with, how many there are, and, how large of an issue this is.
Thank you for the question. So, as I said, the numbers of all the foreign AI autonomous vehicles, because we're just on a testing phase where they're introducing them to the country so they can be tested, collect data, and of course also those data they collect are gonna help them also kind of upgrade like the application layer so they can know, so they can better understand the US, the US road and all those stuff. So the paper that I read, it's only the paper that I read. It's only so 10 of them were asked by the lawmakers that about the data that they're being collected during the testing here in California. So as far as I know, I didn't know that there were 10 of them that were asked even by the lawmakers about what they do about the data they're collecting during the test driving here in America. So those are the number that as I can remember, that was back when I was doing that research. But by now, maybe I can go and look at that and see how many are there. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, so it's more of like an emerging situation since it's still testing.
Yeah,
and okay.
it's more like an emerging situation, but as we're an emerging technology panel, it was it's important and crucial for us to also know, like I mentioned, like TikTok, for example, we didn't see that coming, and then when it's coming, we're like, oh, our data has been it's going outside, so we didn't know, so we have now to ban TikTok, or where we should, for example, at the beginning, knowing the way I'm explaining here now that the foreign autonomous vehicle are introducing this type of threats. So they're just on a testing phase. But look, let's assess this. Let's already put a framework in place to assess those threats before it's too late, like TikTok, because we have to ban it.
Thank you.
Gaston, I've got a follow-up. So you mentioned the 3 layers that you were interested in as a researcher for the autonomous vehicles. Legislation often catches up with the technology afterwards, right? The new tech comes and then legislation catches up. Do you think that legislation can be crafted so that then there would be a level playing field, like all the manufacturers, Tesla, GM, BYD, and so forth, Rivian, that they then would have to store your data here or only collect certain data? Do you think that can be written, those kind of regulations, in your experience?
So thank you for the question. So there's one article I read, for example, let's say when I was reading the national security strategy, I read that we already know that China, for example, it's our biggest competitor in terms of technology. But when I went to do some research and reading some China politics. They banned Tesla cars, like American cars, Tesla, which is an American manufacturer. They banned Tesla cars from driving around their critical infrastructures. And I continue reading the article saying that Tesla, which is Elon Musk, they're now in like back and forth of how they can make sure that those Tesla cars that is in China, they have to keep their data over there, and also ban from driving from critical infrastructure. So I believe that we can catch up with that, because we have to act as soon as possible, as I said, so we can also do our preventive and proactive before that come to a time where it's too late to act.
Thank you. Next question.
Excellent work, everybody. My question is for Sam. Sam, in terms of United States investment in the Ukrainian war, there's been a lot, and NATO in general, NATO allies, there's been a lot of disagreements. There's been a lot of threats coming out of Russia towards NATO allies for whatever equipment we send over, whether it's offensive or defensive. Do you think it's worth potential escalation for the U.S. and other allies to get involved in development and utilization of these sea vessels in this conflict? Because it seems like it's a definitely emerged important issue.
I think it is worth investing in, but not in the way you may think. A lot of the investment that we're doing, we're on the rocks of March 12th, 2024 offers that just recently a $300 million package was just sent to Ukraine from the Department of Defense. But it's not in the money where it needs to be. That money needs to be on the front end development. Part of the reason the Russian program has been successful in its aerial vehicle program is they're developing not just their broader drone programs, but specific components of their drone programs, strengthening their signal sequencers and strengthening their propulsion systems. If we aren't putting that money into developing those specific things, then it's not worth it at all. And if NATO allies want to start getting involved, which is a whole can of worms, but if they do, then it should be there. It should be on the front end technology. I know that gets into allocation for firms and who gets the contracts, but it should be in that technology first and foremost because that's where they need it the most right now.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn back to Lindsay and Giovanni now. So let's talk about these super soldiers. In the drone technology, one of the concerns with China is that while we still, America and the West, want to have a person in the loop before somebody's killed. So meaning, imagine we have these drones, Sam, we get to the point where much more autonomous, right? They have image recognition. They can figure out a target, whether it's a tank or a truck or people on the ground. And then it can self-execute that attack. We don't want that, right? We want to have like a person in the loop. But maybe the Chinese, because of their ethical, maybe they're not as ethical as we would be. And they'll just, yes, we can have Terminator type vehicles. Do you see that same issue with the CRISPR technology? Do you think they would, to get an advantage, like based on your research, on your understanding of the culture there, do you think they would move in that direction where we might not? I saw some evidence of this in your study with the gene editing, right?
So just to make sure I understand your question, you're kind of asking whether we think that that they would kind of move in the direction of using CRISPR as, you mind restating that part? Mm-hmm. Yes, so that is what we were arguing. We, from our research, we kind of looked at not like specific laws, but just overarching, just arguments, just saying, yeah, that we think that because they have been kind of pouring in this money into funding these programs, and just the fact that I believe it's some of their government agencies that have been behind the trials and that are providing that funding. And so just looking at the comparison of how they're using their government agencies are kind of putting in funding towards these programs, and just the lack of a solid law that really bans this genetic research, and how the US has all that and they kind of don't have that there. And so ethically, we would probably say that yes, they are more likely to even go in that direction, whereas the United States has that block on it.
Question from the audience.
Hi, I'm Beju Gandhi. I'm a student at IWP, and my question is for Alexandra. You were sort of speaking music to my ears. Myself and another psychiatrist at IWP were starting a course, a survey course on psychology and behavior and national security. So it's great to see that, you know, students and intelligence and so forth are seeing that need. But my question is, you said that it was psychology was an emerging application as opposed to, but an old technology, so to speak. In your research, have you seen ways in which it's being used more? Like, is it that intelligence agencies are profiling more frequently than previously, or they're doing novel things with social media?
I think intelligence as a whole is not starting, it has been for a bit, but I think it's still emerging to try to understand why things are happening, not just what is happening. So I think particularly why people think the way they do, why they behave, that behavioral piece is newer. I wouldn't say that that in itself is emerging, but just the way we interact on a daily basis, or whether it's in the IC or in academics, is changing. We obviously touched on AI and all these other pieces that influence some of that. I guess the answer is yes and no. I think some of the models have been changed, evolved, like the MCMI, the 4th edition. I think that's obviously a newer thing, but the personality profiling, the psychology, I wouldn't even say the application is emerging. I think these specific aspects of it are newer, but we've been trying to understand why people do things for as long as society's been a thing. So I don't know if you have a specific follow-up, but I think it's a combination of an old thing that it feels like the IC has been afraid's not the right word, but hesitant to use the words of psychology. And I don't know if it's a little bit of like the CI, that they're scared that if everyone is a psychologist, they're going to profile each other. Like, I don't know exactly where that fear comes from, but it feels like there's more of a negative perception. And it seems reserved for those background investigations, those getting in the door, as opposed to actually applying it in the field.
For example, there's a whole big part of our brain called the subconscious that controls our behavior or influences our behavior rather, but we're not aware of it. And so there's not always a logical reason or a political reason or a incentive as we think of it in international relations theory that explains a political decision or behavior. So looking at it from all these multiple perspectives is, I think will be better for us. And anyway, thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Moving on from the rational actor theory. Yeah. Sydney, I have a question for you. So, and then I'll come back to the audience. So did you find in your research the use of these technologies by other countries, other services, other military?
Yeah, I saw a lot with China. I know that's a hot topic. But precursor to mNGS is NGS, or next generation sequencing. And I saw a lot of developments within that, especially in their biotech industry over in China. And a few developments in like smaller countries in Europe as well. But China primarily has definitely been using this.
Thank you. Back to the audience.
Hello. First off, I want to thank you all for your really great presentations. I really thought they were amazing. My question is for the researchers in CRISPR-Cas9. So my question is in two parts. So my first question is, could you possibly concretize what we mean by a super soldier? You talked a little bit about making a human more resistant to disease. I think there was an HIV resistant gene editing example. Does it mean that we could have a Chinese soldier that is stronger, faster, or is it like cognitive development? Maybe their senses are sharper. Is there evidence of any of that, any specific way that the super soldiers improved or enhanced? And my second question is, if there is, what kind of material effect would that have in a conflict? If you have, in Russia and Ukraine, you have soldiers shooting at each other, of course, right? But if we have weapons like drones, if we have a nuclear weapon, to what extent will a soldier, a physical human being 10% stronger, really have an effect when we have technology that can counter that? This is not to minimize the risk or downplay this, but what kind of real effect would it have in conflict?
There we go. Can you hear me? Okay, so I'm going to start with your first question. I forgot to address, but yes, there are endless possibilities in terms of what we could do to enhance soldiers to make them these super soldiers we were talking about. I'm going to focus on your point of strength. I wanted to mention there's a couple of different cases with animal testing that we thought were related to this, between goats being edited to be stronger, and this was more for food production in terms of muscle mass, like more meat yield. But we're thinking that could be something that maybe they take the research from that and carry it over into human editing to see what we could do to increase strength in humans. We also talked about increased senses, like having better vision to be a better shot with like rifle weapons, that kind of thing. But you're right that there are a lot of possibilities there. In terms of the impact that soldiers would have when there's a lot of other major weapons that could be used, I think you do bring up a really good point that like these enhanced soldiers really aren't terribly useful outside of maybe hand-to-hand combat or having like maybe increased like abilities to plan operations, that kind of thing. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, I think we're going to wrap up now with the permission of Aaron, as he asked if we could end just a little bit early to keep the program moving. Is that correct, Aaron? Well, if everyone could have a round of applause for the panel. Aaron will be announcing something.
We have take-home prizes. He's going to grab some more here. Oh, thanks. So we're breaking early. We're going to go 15 minutes until 2:35. So if you're hot, go out there. It's not hot out there. And we'll try to get the room cooled down a little bit, and then we will finish up with our last panel. All right? So we'll see you in 15 minutes, 2:35.
Yeah, great work. So could I have the folks?
Baxter for being here with us today in support, as well as Dr. Ken Rutherford, who I originally did this work on for a class on the international laws of war. And so this is something I'm interested in generally, is of course counter narcotics. I've done a lot of research, descriptive work over the last year and a half trying to understand the drug war, where it is a real drug war, where it is happening in real time, lives are being lost. It is a large scale conflict in countries such as Mexico, which is sort of obviously our main area of focus as the United States, where we're interested in the national security issues such as with fentanyl. It's a major issue, not just for the Drug Enforcement Agency, but also something DIA is very interested in. So it's an area of interest. And what I wanted to hone in on in terms of international law, and I just thought was very interesting, which is a novel concept, and it is that there has been no study of potential applications of IHL, international humanitarian law, or as some call it, international laws of war, in terms of use for drug cartel organizations. And so what I have created are analytical frameworks, or what I have highlighted are analytical frameworks that already exist within the scholarly community of IHL for what a NIAC, or a non-international armed conflict, is, what a non-state actor in such a conflict might be. Typically we talk about that in terms of civil wars, but what I'm laying out is that we can apply these frameworks to drug groups. And one of the major implications here is for the application of the Third Geneva Convention, therefore holding these combatants, these cartel members, as prisoners of war when they are captured during combat operations. Alrighty. So first, just start off in terms of the U.S. relevance. Obviously, cartel groups operate within the United States at a large scale. This is just a map of different DEA offices and what drug groups they're concerned about in those areas. Most of them originate from Mexico. You also have MS-13 in El Salvador. And of course, you have the Mexican cartels that operate all across South and Central America. So these are just, again, just a brief highlighting of they are active here in the United States. This is a national security issue. We're concerned about their involvement inside the United States. But largely what we're talking about today, in order to justify my analytical frameworks, is the fact that inside of Mexico, it is a true war on drugs. It is not the policy war that we have here that started in the late 70s in the United States. It is an actual armed conflict, or series of conflicts, really between major drug groups such as Sinaloa and Jalisco and Las Zetas, or the Zeros. And they are engaged in essentially open warfare with the Mexican government, with local authorities, with the new National Guard established under the AMLO administration. And they are leading to large-scale death. The chart you see before you demonstrates a decrease, supposedly, in the death count and the murder rate. We're looking at the war on drugs here. This is only because they stopped really recording large scale data after the numbers started to skyrocket in the 2010s with the implementation of large scale conflict against the drug groups, because they don't want to publish. Currently, the murder rate in Mexico for the last few years has hovered somewhere around 30,000. That number is expected to slightly decrease perhaps this year, and the trend will go up and down theoretically for the next few years, because this is an ongoing conflict. It's not looking like it's going to go anywhere, as we see desecuritization policy under the AMLO administration, which highlights potential corruption and cooperation, and in my opinion, perhaps a path towards legitimizing cartel groups, which is why the bringing in international law to me is so interesting, because as groups are legitimized right now within the Mexican court system, there has not been any acceptance of use of international law. It has been rebuked by Mexican courts and prosecutors. However, given that Latin America is sort of a great arena for international law in terms of the fact that there are no major great powers there that tend to excise large-scale influence, they can sort of all force each other to obey international law when they choose to. And this started happening in the 90s. We saw it with the fall of the Pinochet regime. Pinochet was ultimately held accountable, most largely not by the UN or the International Criminal Court, but by the OAN, the Organization of American States, and their Inter-American Humanitarian Court. And so Latin America is sort of this really interesting place where international law can actually thrive and be used. And I personally predict that that will continue to occur. And so while I'm not necessarily saying that the analytical frameworks I'm about to present to you will be used, or even that they're likely to be used, but it's just an interesting thing to consider in an age where we are increasingly globalized as a society on the planet Earth as a whole, that international laws continue to be used. And this is a part of the world where it is used more often and is more likely to be able to be used due to a lack of great powers in South America and due to their ability to exert influence over each other through the OAN. So the first sort of big piece that I have here, this comes from a report from the International Committee of the Red Cross. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. They have been fundamental in organizing international law and research on it over the years. And this is sort of just a quote that highlights, I won't read it out to you, you can read it on the screen, that highlights how drug cartels exhibit a great example of powerful non-state actors, especially in the case of Mexico, that are engaged in what could be classified as a NIAC with the Mexican state government, which could then hold them accountable as combatants under international law, as opposed to, say, mercenaries, which are not held under international law. And for research I've done with this, I do have a comprehensive literature review, is not included here today because it largely focuses on the theoretical frameworks and research, not necessarily around specifically what I'm talking about in terms of holding cartel members as prisoners of war. That's the implication that I want to float into your minds, but really I just want us to open our minds to think about the use of international law in this conflict in general. And so that really glaring use of prisoners of war terms is really designed to get you thinking about, hey, this is something nobody's discussing. And it's interesting, and we can kind of think about what are other applications here in this sort of burgeoning field of discussion. And so in terms of the more concrete frameworks, what I have are 7 things that come from a Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, sort of report where they talk about 7 different things that we can see across the field of international law that we can use to determine whether or not a group is a sufficiently organized and armed and effective non-state actor engaged in a NIAC. So the first thing we have is some existence of a command structure. You can see on my poster out in the hall, it'll still be there, it's not in that room, that a lot of these groups have very organized leadership. We tend to know who the leaders are, such as historically you had Felix Gallardo back in the 80s with the Guadalajara cartel, which was one of the first major large groups in Mexico. And they have serious command structures for everything from finance to what you would call hiring. I had a professor who was supposed to be here today. He'll tell you all about how the cartel even has job applications, and part of their process is they have people who enforce against the members of the cartel to keep them in line with threatening family members, blackmail, etc. So they have complex chains of command, especially these big groups like Sinaloa in Mexico. They have headquarters. They have actually multiple headquarters. They control sovereign territory, which leads us into the next part. That's where these HQs are. They use these towns in order to extract resources from them, in order to control the drug routes that go up through Mexico into the United States, which is, of course, their main market. And of course, they have the ability to gain access to weapons, military equipment. They can carry out attacks against armored convoys. There was a chief of police in Mexico City a few years ago who was attacked in his armored convoy by a squad of elite operatives from a major cartel group, where they managed to injure him and kill several civilians in the crossfire. There have been reports of Sinaloa officers, soldiers essentially gunning down helicopters with RPGs. They have heavy equipment. They have armored vehicles, machine guns, body armor, you name it. They have access to it. They have more money than they know what to do with. And they use that not only to gain equipment, but to plan, to coordinate, to carry out these military operations, such as against major officials, even going after various Mexican officials in the last midterm there, which was almost 3 years ago now. There were dozens of judges, political officials, and candidates that were killed for speaking out against the cartel. And this is part of their unified military strategy, their tactics that they use. Everything that they do is in service of distributing more drugs, getting the drugs flowing up to the US southern border. And of course, they have one voice they can negotiate with. They have these strong leaders that carry blackmail force against their members, and they negotiate most largely the way they negotiate with governments is when we capture their members. It's less so diplomatic negotiations and more so let's go in and murder some people or bust into a prison XYZ and threaten you if you do not give us our people back. And so that finally, I don't have a conclusion slide. So yeah, just to wrap things back up, I've laid out some analytical frameworks to essentially say there are platforms that exist that scholars have looked at within international law, how to classify a non-state actor, how to classify a NIAC, and very clearly to me, these conflicts, particularly in Mexico, these large-scale conflicts can be classified under this framework, and we can thus apply them and say, okay, international law applies. And one of the things that applies is the Third Geneva Conventions. We can hold cartel members as prisoners of war. And what this has implications for the United States is saying this legitimizes cartels. This means we might have to potentially negotiate, hand prisoners back over. We have to give them certain treatment. Obviously, we are not likely to obey this, abide by this. It's not likely to happen in the first place. I'm not positing that at all, but it is very interesting to consider as a legitimization tool and just as, again, a way to open your minds to the use of international law in terms of keeping us aware, keeping the IC aware of ongoing developments. That's why this is sort of this emerging issue on this panel for the future to consider, not something that might happen today or tomorrow, but that is continuing to develop in an increasingly globalized world. Thank you.
Thank you, Jacob. Ryan?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ryan Burgess, and I am here to talk to you about the intersection between complex systems theory and intelligence analysis. And as all of the previous panelists have made evidently clear, the success of the U.S. in the coming decades of great power competition and just other strategic competition requires that we proactively understand and act to mitigate our challenges in certain technological areas. It does not appear that current analytical methods or guiding philosophies are adequate for this task because we keep getting caught off guard, and even if we weren't, that wouldn't guarantee future sustainable success. This proposed research program will leverage insights from other fields in basic and applied science, particularly complex systems theory, to produce a testable, verifiable model of technological development that could then be applied to military capabilities analysis. The objective is primarily the development and application of a more effective MCA forecasting methodology. Application would be for government bodies to then essentially be able to proactively predict what an adversarial network, or not necessarily, or probably state entity could be developing in the future in order to, in turn, realize effective countermeasures or weapons or other systems that could leverage the weaknesses of their own systems. So the primary foundational concepts are fourfold. The first is combinatorial search. So this is a formal process in which a solution for a given problem. Okay. Better? Okay. It's the process through which a solution is found for a given problem via the application of generally some sort of algorithm, but in a particular domain. And the picture below is emblematic of a basic combinatorial search, namely that if the diamond shape represents the domain of all possible solutions to a given problem, then each of the dots, I believe they're orange, represent solutions that can be found via an algorithmic process within said domain. And from that, the application of social science is evident when we consider essentially what a technology is. And before we do that, we must understand what an invention is, because invention is the basis of technology. And so an invention is essentially the result of an organized combinatorial search over a range of technological capabilities, namely, in which a specific invention is a bundle or it's a collection of technologies. Seen accordingly, technology is itself the application of science and engineering to human needs and problems in order to further human well-being, flourishing, or other things like military capabilities. So therefore, technological development writ large can be understood as the iterative process through which technologies are layered on top of each other to progressively address certain needs or achieve a desired social, political, economic circumstance. Now, methodologically, this process would involve creation of a testable, verifiable model of technological development. It requires an understanding of the end state and start date, or the end state and start state of said technologies. So, for example, hypersonic weapons. Let's use that as an example. The effective development of hypersonic weapons from a certain knowledge base will require the development and large-scale deployment of certain sub-technologies, such as thermal shielding, effective guidance and control mechanisms, and so forth. And the predictive aspect of this model comes into play when one could, in theory, develop an understanding of what hypersonic technology development looks like writ large. Consider it like a tree. To get to a kinetic hypersonic weapon, one must have certain precursor technologies. And one can understand adversarial capabilities, not just now, but in the future, through an understanding of the process, but also where the adversaries are at a certain time. So, for example, to develop one of the two main types of hypersonic weapons, one requires effective thermal shielding technologies. And if they have those and lack solid rocket motor capabilities, then the adversary may, in fact, be leveraging their ends to develop a glide body type object. So, in theory, this general concept of prognosticating future technological development based on certain rules and laws in social science can be developed if preceding information is correct to a broad understanding of where an adversary may be going in the future. Of course, the possession of less than perfect or ideal information will severely impair this process. So that's a very large flaw. But on the other hand, this general idea, namely the leveraging of objective scientific insight to human scale problems or functionings, such as technological development, has clear aspects or has clear relevance to military capabilities analysis, because we can't expect a certain iterative process to adversarial technological development. Technologies do not occur in a vacuum. Developments do not occur in a vacuum. It depends on who's working on what, who their mentors were, who their proteges are. But if we don't understand where our adversaries are and we don't understand where they're going, then we won't know how. We'll only be responding to the things as they happen, which of course is less than ideal in the military sphere, as well as all other spheres of competition. So to conclude, this research program is viable, but there are two important challenges. The first, writ large intelligence, is imperfect information. A model of technological development may produce wildly divergent conclusions given the inputs. And if we don't adequately understand adversaries' capabilities, intentions, and so forth, then our predictions will be less useful than they could be, if not useful at all. Furthermore, each technology, which then would lead into a certain military capability or capabilities, may have its own tree or development pattern. And if we have to develop different models for, there's both some types of hypersonic weapons. If we have to develop it for certain other weapons, then we have to develop a model for each technology, and that could be very inefficient. So if there were a way to generalize this concept to military capabilities technologies writ large, then that would find a far more ready willingness or ready utility in military capabilities analysis. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Tyler?
I'm going to break with tradition here, and I'm going to stand so I can better read my notes. All right. I'm Tyler Fleming. Today we're going to talk about how to implement the human-centric practice of Agile in the intelligence community. Agile, if you've never heard of it, is a project management technique that seeks to develop high levels of efficiency through collaborative effort and frequent feedback. Agile has grown in popularity in the business community over the last few decades, and I believe that these techniques can drive the cultural and institutional changes necessary for the U.S. Intelligence community to succeed in the world today. All right. So the modern U.S. intelligence community was effectively formed around the failure to foresee and prevent 9/11, and has since been sort of designed around combating non-state actors and terrorism, right? However, the world's changed, and we face remarkably different threats than we did in the last 2 decades, as you've heard ad nauseum today. Near-peer adversaries are challenging the global status quo and seek to become hegemonic powers. And if the IC fails to adapt quickly, it could result in new tragedies for our nation yet again. There are 4 realities the IC currently faces. All but one are more or less self-imposed. As budgets constrict, intelligence agencies tend to withdraw into information silos in order to justify their existence and protect themselves from inevitable budget cuts. U.S. intelligence adversaries are professional, centralized, and technologically advanced, and they're willing to take risks to try to outcompete the United States. Our national strategy documents call for greater resilience, agility, and adaptability in our intelligence community, but there's really no mechanism to establish these concepts across the community with any consistency. And then finally, during times of crisis or change, there's a tendency to centralize, control, and over-rely on technology to solve our problems, which ultimately has the effect of disempowering our intelligence professionals and reducing innovation. To resolve these issues, the IC needs to increase collaboration amongst the various agencies, invest in its people, and quickly respond to changes and new challenges. To do this, a common standard of practice among all 18 agencies will be needed. The modern business community has increasingly relied on the philosophy known as Agile to achieve similar effects, and the IC should look to do the same. By implementing a common practice using these techniques across the IC, the US can break down silos, become more resilient to internal and external political pressures, and become more effective at collecting intelligence, which is what it's all about. Ultimately, intelligence is a human enterprise, and rather than expect technology or new layers of bureaucracy to solve our problems, we need to increase our reliance on the men and women who serve in the IC. Agile is one of the best ways to institutionalize and operationalize these concepts. There's a document, it's called the Agile Manifesto. It lays out the foundational principles of Agile and was written by a group of software engineers in 2001, consisting of 4 key values: individuals and interactions over processes and tools, working software, you can read analysis or collection, IC terms, working software over comprehensive documentation, customer collaboration over contract negotiation, and responding to change over following a plan. These principles have grown beyond software development, being adapted to many different business models over the years. However, it's important to note the difference between Agile principles and Agile-based methods. Agile is really more of a philosophy than a specific method, but many methods are designed around it. There's too many distinct ways of implementing Agile to really describe them all here in detail, but I'll mention Scrum, DevSecOps, and SAFe as being potentially especially useful in a government setting. We'll take kind of a potential sample here. Here we see a possible Scrum-based method for the IC, Scrum being one of the most popular Agile Agile techniques. We begin by establishing Agile teams at the lowest operational level, maybe using a country team as the base as in this model. Each team could have an Agile mentor attached to them to serve as the Scrum Master or whatever the role is depending on the model that's used. The agencies then allow these teams to diffuse and influence upward into each echelon higher over time until it reaches the agency level or the director level or whatever, as high as it needs to go in the agency to be successful. Agile teams are self-forming, low-tech, and best implemented from the bottom up as they diffuse control to the teams rather than centralizing control. For the IC, this means that it will best serve the operational elements at the lowest levels of the intelligence chain on the front line of collection. Agile only uses technology when necessary, but generally relies on bringing people physically together, maybe with a whiteboard as the most advanced piece of technology that they have present. Which seems a little contradictory since it was designed by tech guys, but they understood that to create efficiency and collaboration, you have to engineer effective relationships between people. Agile has already been successfully implemented in small teams throughout SOCOM and a few places in the IC, but these efforts are generally tied to discrete leaders who implement these strategies on their own. Once that leader moves on or rotates out, the process leaves with them. But they do provide a framework for broader success. Government has already started moving towards Agile in a few other different places more broadly. I think last week the Army announced that it was going to implement Agile in developing software. There was a Georgetown professor last year who wrote an article in Studies in Intelligence who described the application to the Directorate of Analysis, CIA. I want to see another model for that. So, my suggestion is that ODNI, with its role as the mission integrator for the IC, should become the advocate for Agile practices across the community and is best positioned to lead the way in developing new Agile methods that can be scaled and implemented, especially for intelligence purposes. A new ICD, for example, could establish a common set of business rules across the intelligence community while still allowing each entity to use whatever methodology they think is best for them. But the shared framework will still allow for effective collaboration across organizations. Doing so would create a unity of effort in the face of government crisis and budget cuts, would generate creative solutions to compete with our adversaries, would meet the goals laid out in our national security documents, and ultimately would delegate greater operational control to our intelligence professionals. Thank you.
Very good piece. Thank you, Tyler. Clayton?
Hello, everyone. Is everyone still awake? Yeah?
Yeah.
Who? All right. There you go. Army. Shout out to the Army. So, good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Bailey. Thank you to my colleagues up here with me on this panel for your time and attention. Today, raise of hands, get everyone wake up here. Who knows of ChatGPT? All right? Who knows of the broader term we see as AI? Everyone should in the news or anything, right? Okay. All right. But what is that clicking noise? Sorry. Oh. Sorry, me.
It's in the crowd.
All right. So sorry about that. All right. So the overview of this presentation is to convey what is ChatGPT and AI, in addition to what are the probable nefarious uses and implementations of AI in such programs such as ChatGPT by cyber criminals aligned to state and non-state actors. And the scope of this presentation will be for the non-state actors focusing on Russia. And this is, again, is from a strategic overview at a 30,000 foot view approach. So bear with me, and I expect a lot of questions here. Going to the next slide here. Okay. So likely uses of ChatGPT will be used in information operations, or what we call as I/O. I/O similar to that of seen in 2016 elections here in the United States, where actions by adversaries to seek and sow distrust and negative image upon the democratic system. And then as you look at the second bullet there, think of winning the information space, hearts and minds, perception as a nation. Russia likely sees this tech as a tool to advance IO operations in cyberspaces and information space. Russian way of thinking has IO, psychological, and cyber warfare all into one. They call this IPB, or information confrontation doctrine, as you can see there. And going to bullet 3, think of checks and balances, oversight on this. And then bullet 4, the tip of the iceberg. This is the start of what's to come. We'll get into some more of that down here, but skipping to that right now is when 2 months after the debut of ChatGPT, there was more than 30 million users, and it got roughly 5 million visits a day. So 2 people which acknowledged that figure said that this made the software the fastest growing software in memory up to that point, per the sources of that. So I thought that was an interesting nugget to include there. And then going to slide 3. So I'm not going to read these for you. Y'all can read these and ingest it and ask me questions about it later. But going on this, today AI is at the heart of many technologies we use, including smart devices, voice assistants, such as Siri and Apple devices. Companies are incorporating techniques such as neural languaging processing and computer vision, the ability for computers to use human language and interpret images to automate tasks, accelerate decision making, and enable customer conversations with chatbots. And to focus on machine learning here, bullet number 2 there. ChatGPT has many strengths, as we all may or may not know, or can just think of those. So it can generate highly coherent and contextual appropriate text, which is why it is often used in applications such as chatbots, virtual assistants, and automated writing. It has the ability to generate human-like text, which makes it well suited for creating chatbots, conversations, and natural language engaging platforms for users. So, tying back in IO operations from the 2016 election as a sidebar here, we saw a lot of fake accounts set up through the IRA, or the Internet Research Agency, which was headed by the then alive Vladimir Prigozhin. So we saw a lot of election interference on that front. And with that said, there was some grammatical errors and not clear English text that was being sent out as far as information, but ChatGPT tends to close that gap, or most likely or most probable will close that gap in information operations. And then a main point to take away is that technology evolves faster than we can write policy on these technologies, and technology evolves so much as the definitions evolve so much in the tools, so much must our oversight of those tools. Next slide here. So actors' usage of ChatGPT here. So you may see on bullet 2 foothold assistance, and you may be asking yourself, what's foothold assistance? For all of you that don't know, refers to the process of helping threat actors establish an initial presence or foothold within a target system or network, gaining accesses, doing reconnaissance, taking that exfiltrated data back via espionage campaigns. And also, sidebar, there's a difference between what a cyber attack is and what cyber espionage is. There's 2 different definitions at play there. But going back on task here, with open available as well as ChatGPT, as it's open available on the open source and web here, hackers can now take a snippet of code and ask ChatGPT to analyze it and provide a high-level summary of what each module does. Such technology has the potential to significantly empower seasoned hackers to reduce the barrier and entry for the overall potential adversaries. So I will say it is a tool enabler. It's not the the end all be all. It's not the the silver bullet, so to speak. ChatGPT. You still need the hard skills, so to speak, of a hacker or a cyber, we'll call them professional or criminal, to know how to write code and the binary functions and software makings of that. But ChatGPT is that soft skill that you can bring in to enable and refine those skills and kind of like cut corners in a way to gain accesses or what have you. So I will say also that after a bunch of repeated tests that I have seen in demos, now I may alarm, I have not been into ChatGPT. Colleagues of mine that I've seen have gone in and practiced with code and like different memos that they've written, and it's actually pretty startlesome. It's pretty cool. ChatGPT, to deliver a complete application, it will fail if you ask it to write a complete section of code, and if you're expecting it to spit out a perfect snippet of code to you, it's not going to do so, which is a gap for that. And then going into the weaponization of AI to where AI can most amplify baseline harm, as we've harped on here, as I have, is most probable use is through online misinformation and disinformation, which have nefarious motives. Online disinformation, I may make clear, takes two forms. One is the generation or distribution of inaccurate content, which can be targeted to certain individuals or demographics to push forward certain ideologies. And then also thinking of this, think of, whoa, going back to the Army here. Capability plus intent equals threat is what we were always taught. If you have the capability, those hard skills I was talking about as a cyber actor, the intent to use those, and the capability also with ChatGPT and the intent, which equals threat. And we need to take this into our policy and threat framework as well to go after these adversaries. The fifth slide here. So focusing on bullet one, think of, again, going back to the 2016 election where we had the IRA's most notable group using IO operations against our election process. And what we could have seen, or what we could see here in the upcoming 2024 elections, and how I think through my assessment, I think we're better postured than we were 8 years ago. And taking an example of ChatGPT can assist hackers to create code to bypass even AI software security systems. And I will add that the code which is in ChatGPT is called polymorphic code. Does anyone know what that is? No? All right. So polymorphic code mutates while the original algorithm is intact. So getting into that code and trying to extract it and pretty much play around with it and reverse engineer is very, very difficult. So the folks at OpenAI and ChatGPT really got that right. I go into this slide here. All right. Going back quick. As you can see on the quote there, I'm a huge fan of Paul Schar's work. He is a executive vice president and director of studies at CNAS, a think tank in DC, and author of 4 Battlegrounds, Power in the Age of AI. And he says this, and I quote, "AI is about to transform the character of warfare, as gunpowder, tanks, aircraft, and the atomic bomb have in previous era." And that will lead me back to my takeaways. Where do you see this tech going back on 2016 to 2024? Where do you see it in the next 8 years, 16 years? And not just the national security sector, but the private industry and how it's transformed, and how the acquisition process, which has been talked here in past panels, how that's going to feed the Department of Defense or other IC agencies. And then 2 takeaways that I'll leave you is, An intelligence challenge is, how do we use AI in a manner that it doesn't create a permissive environment for malicious use by adversaries now and in the future, with the use of these open software capabilities. And then two, with the challenge of time to pace ahead of adversaries such as China and Russia, how or what must we do, if not already, to get ahead of them in this tech? I would say between Russia and China, the most immediate threat is Russia and China is China. However, what history's taught us is never underestimate the Russians. Never underestimate Putin and his regime. And I will say the Russians, as far as red team cyber operations go, from what you may or may not hear, it's actually it's good, and don't underestimate it. So with that, that concludes my brief. Pending any questions at the end of my next colleague's brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Clayton. And now we'll go to Ludmila, who, like I said, has got a very provocative presentation. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bailey. Thank you, my colleagues, panelists. Thank you, the audience. My name is Ludmila Taran. I have been living in Texas for over 10 years when I published the Dallas Telegraph newspaper. We have over 100 Facebook groups that we moderate. So every day I encounter Russian trolls who try to conduct their disinformation campaigns in our groups, which have an audience of over 100,000 people. Just a month ago, several Russian television channels tried to get an interview from me when another crisis occurred at the border between the US and Mexico. At that time, the governor of Texas was trying to stop the migration wave at the border. Knowing that all today's media in Russia are controlled by the Kremlin, definitely I refuse to provide any comments. In the following weeks, a wave of Russian disinformation began, claiming that Texas is succeeding from the US and that Russia is ready to support, as it allegedly supported the separation of Donbass and Crimea. After 2 years of absent, Russian disinformation campaigns returned to the US, with the border crisis becoming a convenient pretext for this. I call Russian propaganda creative evil because the Kremlin truly approaches its disinformation campaigns creatively and individually. Depending on the region it needs to influence, and always hits the sore spot, whether it's border crisis in the US or the French colonial legacy in Africa. Let's take a look at my small documentary about what Russian propaganda is today and what option to exist to combat Russian disinformation campaigns.
Мы создаем большое количество информационных источников, которые не связаны с нами. И пока ЦРУ докапывается, что они связаны с нами, у них уже огромная аудитория. Иногда докапываются, схлопывают. У нас бывает так, просыпаешься утром, у тебя 600 каналов сразу закрыты. Сразу. Ну, пока они их закрывают, мы уже новые сделали. Вот такое у нас беготня друг за другом продолжается все это время, это даже весело.
The concept of propaganda originated in the 16th century and refers to the selective use of information to achieve a political effect. The term of disinformation is associated either with Nazi Germany or the Soviet Union, and its meaning lies in the deliberate dissemination of false messages, fakes intended to mislead public opinion. Starting from August 2008, with Russia's invasion of Georgia, there has been a significant shift in Russian propaganda. The Kremlin demonstrated new disinformation methods to the world in 2014 with the annexation of Crimea and Donbass. While contemporary Russian propaganda responds to emerging political challenges of Russian foreign policy using modern technologies, the foundation of Russian propaganda still remains rooted in old Soviet method from the Cold War era. Both the USSR at that time and Russia today seek to influence public opinion, engage influencers, disseminate fake news and spread false information. Russian propagandists can be entire TV channels, news agencies or individual trolls. Today, unlike Soviet time, they do not seek to persuade. Instead, they confuse, perplex and divide, affecting families, societies and entire countries. The methodology of modern Russian propaganda is best described by several characteristics. Firstly, they are inexpensive and multi-channel. The more sources used to promote propaganda narratives, the better. Secondly, Russian propaganda does not need time to fact-check, so the reaction to an event occurs instantly. The method of repeating the same narratives is employed to first make the consumer remember and then agree accept the disinformation. Thirdly, telling the truth is not the Kremlin's goal, so false sources are used to fabricate information. Moreover, the dissemination of false information in Russia, unlike in the USA, has no negative legal consequences. Fourthly, in Russian disinformation campaigns, there is no logic, nor is there a consistent presentation of events. The Kremlin creates such a large number of possible explanations for the same event that the ordinary consumer of information does not know which one to choose and which one is correct. For the Kremlin, there are no small or unimportant channels of information. Fifthly, Russian disinformation campaigns have begun experimenting with artificial intelligence.
Владимир Владимирович, здравствуйте. Я студент и учусь в Санкт-Петербургском государственном университете. Хочу спросить, правда ли, что у вас много двойников? И еще, как вы относитесь к тем опасностям, которые несет в нашу жизнь искусственный интеллект и нейросети? Спасибо.
A deepfake voice of US President Joe Biden has already been deployed in New Hampshire, urging voters not to show up for the first elections.
What a bunch of malarkey. We know the value of voting Democratic when our votes count. It's important that you save your vote for the November election.
To conduct information warfare, Russia establishes control over mass media, develops news platforms that serves as agent of Russian influence. Modern Kremlin influence operations are aimed at controlling Russian diasporas worldwide and legitimizing military actions. Social media aids Russian propaganda in rapidly disseminating emotional charged content. Information campaigns are used by Russia as tools in hybrid warfare operation. The bloodless annexation of Crimea serves as prominent example where the Kremlin won the conflict with minimal use of violence, breaking the adversary's leadership and creating a massive fog of war. All Russian disinformation campaigns targeting Europe, the US, Latin America and Africa since the onset of aggression in Ukraine aim to prevent Western solidarity around Ukraine and the shipment of Western weapons to Ukraine. And the misleading and provocative content about immigration in the US and border security, which has been disseminated by Russian state media and Kremlin-affiliated internet accounts since January 2024, is precisely aimed at undermining support for Ukraine. Former Russian President Dmitry Medvedev stated on X that the border dispute in Texas is another vivid example of the weakening of US hegemony, and the creation of the People's Republic of Texas is becoming more and more real. As a tool of information warfare, Russia also utilized Russian-speaking diasporas, compatriots residing in NATO countries, including the Russian-American diaspora, influencing them through Russian language resources on social media and Russian television channels that are broadcasted in Western cable networks. The long-term effect of Russian disinformation is the loss of trust in the West, including in the United States, in institutions such as the media and government. Putin's goal is to sow doubt and discord, including among Americans. That is precisely why Kremlin disinformation campaigns need to be resisted, not sporadically but systematically addressing this issue. Traditional debunking of propaganda narratives demonstrated during the US presidential campaigns in 2016 and 2020 is likely to be ineffective during the 2024 presidential elections. New approaches are needed. Firstly, there must be open and ongoing discussion of Russian manipulation methods with the American audience. Secondly, it is important to combat not just the propaganda itself, but its consequences. Thirdly, there is a need for a constant increase in the volume of persuasive information and an attempt to reduce the flow of Russian disinformation. This is possible, including through controlled leaks of intelligence information. Fourthly, it is important to disable or restrict the broadcasting of Russian television in the US. Not only Russia Today and Sputnik, but also Russia-sponsored RTVI in New York, including their resources on YouTube, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Fifthly, social media platforms should continue content moderation. Just as the First Amendment of the Constitution guarantees Americans' right to freedom of speech, it also guarantees social media platforms' rights to editorial oversight of content. Sixthly, it is important for the intelligence community to work with the Russian-speaking diaspora, monitoring sentiments within the diaspora. Because like the Russian Orthodox Church of the Moscow Patriarchate in the US, the Russian diaspora serves as a channel for Kremlin influence campaigns in the US. Russian intelligence services have extensive experience in conducting hybrid warfare, and judging by the Ukrainian campaign, the Kremlin spends no less money and effort on spreading disinformation than on conducting conventional warfare. According to Ukrainian military intelligence, the budget of the new disinformation campaign Maidan 3, which the Kremlin conducts to discredit Ukraine both domestically and abroad, amounted to a record $1.5 billion. Russia has not ceased its intensive propaganda campaign since 2014. Today, it increasingly focuses on social media, cloning well-known websites, and using artificial intelligence constantly, attacking not only Ukraine and the West, but also Latin America, Africa, and the Middle East. The intelligence community not only should not slow down the pace of tracking and debunking Russian disinformation rhetoric, but should instead strengthen their efforts. It is also important to recruit and collaborate with talented experts of Russian propaganda and disinformation campaigns who, understanding the Kremlin mentality, knowing the Russian language and the methodology of Kremlin information psychological operation, will be able to regularly assist in combating Kremlin misinformation.
And I have the last remark. The fight against Russian disinformation involves collaboration between various agencies, including the State Department, the Department of Defense, the intelligence community, the private sector, including social media platforms, administrators of large Russian-speaking groups on Facebook, influencers targeting the Russian-speaking American audience on Instagram, TikTok, and Telegram. Such work requires a creative approach that takes into account the First Amendment to the Constitution and respect confidentiality, adhering to the principles of transparency expected by American society. Thank you so much.
Ludmilla needs to catch a flight, so what I'd like to do is start with any questions for her.
Thank you all. Mr. Ron, thank you. You're my new best friend. I'm a doctoral student at IWP, and my thesis that I've just begun is on weaponized information. And you've checked a lot of the boxes that I've already been kind of looking into, from the Global Engagement Center, how AI influences all of the Russian misinformation and disinformation, and how it all kind of connects together. So thank you. And I hope to keep in touch. I'm going to give you my cards before you leave for your flight, because I'd like to pick your brain a lot more. But you mentioned something that I didn't think of. You said something in the video about the Russian diaspora. And how if I understood correctly, are you saying, are they a good resource to pinpointing Russian misinformation at an early out of the gate, and being able to identify it, and then also turn it around and being able to put it out there to the general public much quicker if we're recruiting from Russian expatriates who are now citizens here in the United States? Is that what you were advocating?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for understanding the Russian propaganda. Russian diaspora always was the source of information, the recruiting agents. Russian diaspora is very dangerous source, and it was not oversight by intelligence agencies. And I think that we need more work with Russian diaspora, and especially in the critical cities in the United States, like Dallas, when we have a lot of factories that produce military capabilities. So, and we have huge Russian diaspora in New York, in California, in Sacramento particularly, and huge Russian diaspora in Houston. And if you just go to, for example, Russian Dallas, Russian Houston Facebook group, and just start to read what people are just discussing every day, and you will catch the problem. Unfortunately, we need to pay more attention to the Russian diaspora here. They are agent of influence. And they do not scary. They are feeling their self very freely to do what they are doing. I hope I answered your question.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. So I grew up in Eastern Europe, in Romania.
Mulțumesc.
Da, eu vă mulțumesc.
I've been in Romania, beautiful country.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Vladimir Bukovsky, in The Soul of Man Under Socialism, described it beautifully, that you have an environment where you think one thing, say another, right, and believe a third, which is a complete cognitive dissonance, and that's the way it is. We are the land of reality TV. We are now an information society, we call ourselves. I don't want to say what chance do we have, but I'll phrase it. Is this more of a problem that's going to have a tech solution, or is this more of a problem that needs a human temperament psychology solution, in your view?
Thank you for the great question. The answer will be we need both. The short answer will be we need both.
Ludmila, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure.
Yeah, so Tom Champion, student at Georgetown, also a contractor supporting an organization that has run afoul of certain information operations and Russian active measures. So, along with that vein, you called out the Russian diaspora, who firsthand I've seen some of the narratives that float around even in the DC area, right? And they're pretty pro-conflict, from my opinion. That being said, information operation authorities are very specific, and when we start targeting U.S. persons or for information resiliency operations, how do you think we can? Have you looked at what that means in regards to authorities and where we need to shift as far as partnering with private businesses or whether it be FBI, DHS in order to actually start countering these domestic narratives and identifying actors that might be not only willful idiots, but complicit in as foreign agents?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I have addressed this issue in my research. This is just short part of the research. I think that we need, first of all, we need to learn Russian diaspora because, how to say politely, you know, I was born in Ukraine, I grew up in Russia, and we are not polite people. And I am trying to say it politely. Russian people or Russian-speaking people, they just a language of force. Definitely, it's not Putin. Maybe it's artificial Putin. Who knows? These days, right? And Russian-speaking diaspora, I understand that we have the constitution and we need to follow the constitution and bills of free and so on. But Russian-speaking diaspora, as well as Russia, understand just one language, language of force. And Russian diaspora needs to know that we have foreign agency acts, and we need to popularize these acts. And we are doing in our Facebook groups. Every time that we see just propaganda or trolls, we are just putting short sentence. You need to register like a foreign agent, and they just stop immediately. This is just one of the way, but we have many. And I have, as I said, I have full research, and it's not just. Thank you.
Other questions from the audience?
And please do so.
I have a question, but it's for Clayton. But does anyone else have a question for Mr. Ran?
Does anyone else have a question?
Yes, if somebody have a question for me, and if I have permission of Dr. Bale and my panelists to leave, we start the website russianpropaganda.net, and we will be adding more and more materials to this website. russianpropaganda.net. Thank you so much. And we are flying to Texas, which I love dearly.
Don't you mean the Republic of Texas?
She did have a slide on Texas.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you. It was great having you here with us. All right. Questions for other panelists?
Yes. Hi, I have a question about your research. My name is Jason King. I'm a student at Georgetown University's Applied Intelligence program. I'm currently doing research on AI ethics and AI applications in the intelligence community.
First off, do you know Barry Zuloff?
Yes, he's my thesis advisor.
He's good people.
Yes, Dr. Zuloff is great.
Yep.
So my research is about culpability and tying it with explainability. Essentially, if you have a piece of AI and it's unexplainable and you don't really know how input goes to output and something goes wrong, who's culpable? And I'm looking at the perspective from
attribution.
Yes. So the U.S. government, not just intelligence communities, but let's say the wider military and law enforcement, the national security space, because we are using AI tools, and it is possible that things can go wrong. And I'm trying to find a way to attribute culpability to certain persons or teams or something like that, trying to develop a framework. But the same can be said for, let's say you have a criminal organization, a drug cartel in Mexico, also using an AI tool in a large organization. In your understanding of ChatGPT, large language models, or generative AI as a whole, if I ask you the question, if somebody uses an AI tool that has a low explainability, and there are adverse effects, somebody gets hurt, privacy rights are being breached or something along those lines, who do you think is at fault? Is it somebody like the user, the developer of the tool, the management that initiated the activity, or somebody else? What is your opinion on that?
If I may, let me tackle the first part here. So would the tool or the manager be at fault? I would say the end user would be at fault. But as far as attribution in cyber operations, Red, it's very difficult. And at the unclass level, it's the Russians use non-state actors to obfuscate line and lynch back to the state. So as far as attribution, if a user, a non-state actor or a group, an intrusion set uses an AI platform to gain access, right, or to exfil data via cyber espionage, attribution in itself is hard. It's not impossible. Again, it depends on the resourcing that's behind a firm, a agency, or center within said agency. It's possible. And does that answer your question? What's the second part of that? Because I think there was a couple parts in that overall question.
So you did answer my question, thank you. But I have a follow-up.
Yeah.
What if we change the circumstance? Let's say it's not Russia or a foreign non-state actor, right? The government will sponsor a non-state actor. What if you have a very disgruntled domestic group? What if you have a very bright teenager in a basement somewhere in California and they use an AI tool and it causes a lot of harm? What if they didn't make the tool and somebody else did, their buddy somewhere else? So I'm getting to like a situation where a lot of people that I ask say it's the end user, but other people that I ask say it's the developer, right? So other people I ask say it's the people who provided the data that went into the training of the model. So I'm curious in your opinion. So it's the end user in a situation, let's say in Russia. Is it always the end user no matter what situation you're in?
I would say it's dependent on each situation is different. I will say also to the first part of that question, nothing is impossible as gaining or I guess we'll say the reverse forensics of said system to find out which user was where, the IP address, timestamp, and everything like that. I will say as far as AI systems go, I mean, especially with ChatGPT and the polymorphic code, it's kind of like solving a Rubik's Cube that's fighting back in a way. And that's quoted by Q from James Bond, so I don't get called out. But it is difficult, but it's not impossible. Again, everything comes down to the capability of the actors on both sides, red team and blue team, and the forensics of that. I wouldn't rule anything out. And again, it's just from research, we're very good at these kind of things. Doesn't mean our adversaries aren't, but I'm confident in whatever agency or center that would be pinpoint on this would have on that. But we can talk offline. We can connect. All right.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, you got it, man.
Hi, thank you everyone for speaking. It was a wonderful panel. This question is actually for Mr. Clayton Hawes. I was wondering, and I don't know if this is kind of a basic question based on everything that you touched, but how effective is like ChatGPT detection software in general and in targeting IO?
Software? All right, so not good. So like we'll take an example here. Turnitin tries to detect ChatGPT. There's been examples in past of people who have been like accused of ChatGPT or generative AI use when they haven't, but it catches it up because it looks at technical terms and it'll think that is AI generated or just different language modules or uses in the natural language processing. So go back to the first part of the question again. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it was basically how effective is ChatGPT detection software?
Detection?
Yeah.
I would say average. Just not trying to rule it out. I haven't really done a lot of research on that, so I'm not a SME or anything to speak to that at length. But without knowing for a definitive answer and with not knowing, I would probably say average. But from examples I've seen from just research, it always comes down to the how do I want to say the human factor of it.
I see.
Yeah.
I have a quick follow up to
Yeah.
that. If I know with like generative AI images, sometimes the fingers will look strange or the faces will look fuzzy, and that's a way to tell that it's an AI generated image.
Excuse me. Yeah, like that President Zelensky one that my colleague showed when he was speaking. You could see just the color difference from his neck to his face, and the color complexion in the background, and the like. Even from here, I could see the difference in like not pixels. I don't have eagle eyes, but like just the difference in motion. So you're right on that. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess to tie that into what you're discussing, is there a way, like some high points that people could look for to try to determine for messaging, like for text, if something's off with
messaging or text? Well, read more. That's a quick answer to a very complex question if you really want to delve deep. Also, like, I don't know how to detect it. I don't know, to be honest, on the second part of that question, but I'll get back to you. It'll be an RFI. I have 24 hours to get back to you. So, yeah. Carlos. Yeah, you got it, man.
I had a question for Tyler. I was going to say, what do you think is preventing the IC from going agile? And you may have mentioned this, but would you say that the IC is uniquely poised for agile in the way that you framed it as less technology? I've heard from managers saying, well, I don't want to teach my team how to use Kanban if our laptop is going to tell us next week it's another thing. But that thought process of less technology, especially in the IC, and then where the IC goes, the federal government might follow. And do you think it's a unique opportunity for the next generation of intelligence professionals, once they become managers of their first small team, to start implementing these practices from the bottom up?
I got the bad one. Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think it's a very unique opportunity. I think that IC is exactly where Agile can and should be used. I think the problem is that it's a total overhaul in culture, right? And I think your question asking about the next generation coming in, I think that is where it's at. But it takes a generational move, and that's not something that happens quickly or easily. So, yeah, in order to implement Agile, you have to completely disrupt how government works on a day-to-day basis, which is why I kind of suggest it should work from the bottom up, where things are already a little bit chaotic on the bottom, right? In the at the point of collection, where you have human collection or SIGINT collection happening, you have these very dynamic environments where it could be easily implemented. And then those people who are doing that learn it, they embrace it, and then they move up and they take it with them. That's kind of my only idea of how it could work. We've seen a few efforts where governments brought in outside consultants, business consultants, McKinsey type things. It doesn't work very well because it's top down, and that's antithetical to what Agile is all about. It can't be pushed from the top down. It has to work its way from the bottom up. So I think that's how it happens.
Do you have any more questions? Not? I just want to say this was my kind of panel. Thank you very much. Jacob, I may talk to you afterwards about the whole POW thingy, international humanitarian law. But we do have lovely parting gifts. We will give you. There we go. So we turn it over to this. Each one. Thank you. And I'll let you wrap. You can wrap your panel and introduce your.
Yeah, I think we'll just have my panel stay here.
Okay, sure.
Yeah, I think. One comment. I'd like to thank really all five of you. I think this was a really great job, and I appreciate the good work, the professionalism that you put in, and I wish all of you, as well as the other students, just the very best in your future endeavors. What I'd like to do now is introduce our closing speaker. Our closing speaker today is Mr. Manoli Pragmatics. He is the Vice President for Research and Engagement at the National Intelligence University. And at the NIU, he is responsible for our research institute, to include research fellows from different government agencies, our academic press, library, and several other areas of university operations. One thing I could say is somebody who's been at NIU now for really 20 years, our Office of Research really does tremendous work in terms of engagement and this type of activity. Sir?
Great. Thank you, Chris. It's 4:15. I had actually seen that at 4:45 earlier, so I got about 45 minutes to prepare. No, I'll keep you, I won't keep you long from getting over there and to the Beltway if need be. I want to say congratulations to everybody involved in putting this event together. I was involved actually in some of the very first conversations when it was Wes Westbrooks and Jerry and Aaron Dennis was still working with NIU. So it's really been gratifying to see how it's developed over time. And really want to thank the Institute for World Politics for generously hosting today, and all the IWP team that have been involved in putting it together. It's been really wonderful to see new members coming along, and just want to reemphasize NIU's support for the group and for this format. Those of you who are have not made your way over to the job fair, maybe I'll do a little bit. So I'm going to go off of what I'd actually gotten pre-pub cleared, so don't tell on me. How many of you have seen Oppenheimer? Right. So now it's the okay. I really liked the movie. So if you see from my bio, I worked at the Department of Energy for a long time. So it was topics really near and dear to my heart, and a lot of things embedded in it that had roots. The roots of our organization are really embedded in that story. So I'll ask a trivia question for those of you who have seen the movie, or sort of it comes up vaguely in the movie, but if you really know the time. Does anybody know what the name of the supercomputer that was used to do the calculations that supported the creation of the atomic weapon? Okay, so it's a trick question. There were no supercomputers, right? It was all slide rules, chalkboards, a lot of ingenuity, a lot of creativity. But one of the things that comes clear in the movie that I really liked about it, I have some quibbles there. If you ever want to talk about the quibbles, I got some quibbles with it on some of the decisions that the filmmakers made. But what I liked about it was there's a good reminder of just how high the stakes were at that time. That at a macro level, they could not have been higher. It was literally an existential threat to the state. And then if you look at some of the scientists who were involved in the actual program, a number of them were Jewish refugees from Europe whose family either did or would perish in the Holocaust. So from a macro level to the individual level, the stakes, it was literally existential. The stakes could not have been higher. So this is what I say, I can't actually usually do this in the office, but if you pull out your cell phone, hold up your cell phone if you got your cell phone. So you're holding more computing power in your hand than existed in the world at that time, right? So it's the transistors a couple years later. And it really is a transformational time. The atomic age really did change, the dawn of the atomic age changed the world. It was a time of uncertainty. It was a time of technological advancement and diffusion. And again, the stakes couldn't have been higher. So we're at a time now, actually, of technological change. Unfortunately, I got called back to the office. I got back later than I'd hoped. But some of the things that you're just talking about now are literally changing the way the world operates and the way that we look at the world and understand the world, and also in ways that are very easily distributed to new actors and to traditional actors. So it could not be a better time to be interested in a career in intelligence or national security. I've known Tracy Blackburn, who spoke earlier today, for a long time. I know a lot of what he's done in his career that he unfortunately I know he was not able to talk about today. But there's a reason why somebody like Casey has been given this job of understanding the issues, the emerging technologies and economic security. It's a hard issue. It brings together two somewhat disparate, but obviously very well connected topics at a very challenging time. And if you are interested in a career in national security or intelligence, or even just further research as a student or a faculty member, hopefully you heard there are a number of themes that were interwoven throughout his remarks. Issues that we are really working on trying to understand and are struggling with. So, like I said, now is a fantastic time to be joining. From a scholarship perspective, we really need the kind of scholarship that you're hearing here that pull apart the IC and really understand it. There is an active debate about, is intelligence a profession? Is it not a profession? It's a series of professions. In a lot of ways, those, as I heard somebody the other day, that conversation is just academic, as if academic was a synonym for like not important. But it is absolutely important. These are the things that really define our, this is literally academic work that matters and really defines who we are as professionals and how we understand our organization, how we understand our work. There is a thought process out there that the IC is just a bunch of people doing stuff, and absolutely the mission is vital, but really that sort of self-reflection and understanding of the work is vitally important and really matters. So we appreciate gatherings like this that, 5 years ago when it was envisioned, it's the first conversations. I think this is the maturation of those discussions. And what I heard this morning and just now is a serious conversation about important topics that really matter. So again, I applaud the students who participated, the faculty members and advisors who advised them. Again, IWP and Aaron and the whole team here. It really is exciting to see this come together. From our perspective, as you heard from Dr. Ballard this morning, we are committed to advancing the conversation and remaining engaged with these universities. And I know sometimes it's hard for people to get access to the data and to get access to information, and there's reasons for that, but we at NIU have the ability to have a foot in both worlds, in both academia and the government. We want to continue to play that bridging role and advance the field of intelligence studies so that it can inform the intelligence profession. So again, I'd read until 4:45, but I guess I'll cut it short there. So
the slide says 4:15.
4:15. If you, like I said, thank you for participating. Congratulations to the organizers. I'm really grateful for the career I've had in government so far, and hopefully you have an opportunity, if you haven't gotten over there already, to talk to people about potentially pursuing the same. So, honor of saying, I'll hand it to Aaron or to Chris to close things down.
All right, so don't leave anything behind. Unless you want to leave behind charging cables for cell phones and stuff, because I can always use an extra one. I want to thank Sarah and her events team and Sebastian Smirno back here, who made us all look good. And I can't wait until you turn Dr. Bailey into Putin using some AI for the recording. Yes, he was in the documentary. So thank you, everybody.